Morgoth and Sauron, the difference between the two Dark Lords in the ancient days, before the rise and fall of kingdoms, before the wars that shaped Middle-earth as we know it. There existed powers so great that their mere presence cast shadows upon the world. They were beings of vast intelligence, cunning and overwhelming malice, but they were not the same. One was a godlike force of destruction, the original source of evil in Arda, whose ambitions stretched beyond the dominion of any mere land or people. The other, his most devoted lieutenant, learned from him and in time sought to forge his own path to supremacy. These are the stories of Morgoth and Sauron, the two Dark Lords of Middle-earth. But who were they, truly? How did they differ? And why, despite Sauron's vast power and cunning, did he never surpass his former master? The origin of Morgoth, the first and greatest evil, long before the world as we know it came into being. There was Eru, Ilúvatar, the supreme creator of all things. From his thought, he gave life to the Ainur, divine spirits of immense power, each with a role in shaping the universe known as E. Among these spirits, one stood above all others, Melkor. Melkor was the mightiest of the Ainur, blessed with vast knowledge and a burning desire for creation. But within him, a flaw took root, a seed of pride, of ambition, of hunger. He wished not only to shape the world, but to rule it, to make it his own, to bend it to his will. And so, when the Ainur sang the great music, thy song of creation, Melkor wove into it his own themes, seeking to dominate the melody of existence itself. But Ilúvatar was beyond Melkor's reach. The music he sought to corrupt only became richer, incorporating his discord into something greater than even he could comprehend. Yet the defiance remained, and when the Ainur descended into the world to shape it, Melkor followed not to create, but to destroy, to twist, to make war upon all that was good. Thus began his descent, and thus was born the first Dark Lord. Now calling himself Morgoth, meaning black foe of the world, he waged war against the Valar, the guardians of Arda. He defiled the lands, built fortresses of horror, and corrupted lesser spirits to serve him. Among these followers was one who would become infamous in his own right, Sauron. Sauron, the student of evil. Unlike Morgoth, Sauron was not an original force of chaos. He was once Mairon, a Maiaunan of the lesser divine spirits, but still immensely powerful. In the beginning, he was not evil. In fact, he admired order, structure, and efficiency. He longed for perfection, and this, ironically, was what led him to Morgoth. Morgoth was not a builder. He was a destroyer. But Sauron saw potential in his master's power. He was seduced not by the promise of mindless destruction, but by the order that a supreme ruler could impose upon the world. Where Morgoth sought domination through sheer strength, Sauron sought it through deception, through manipulation, through control. For centuries, Sauron served as Morgoth's greatest lieutenant, overseeing his armies, strengthening his fortresses, and learning the ways of corruption. When Morgoth waged war against the elves and the Valar, it was Sauron who commanded his forces. He was the master of terror, the enforcer of his will. Yet in the end, Morgoth was defeated, cast into the void by the Valar, stripped of his physical form, his essence forever banished beyond the walls of the world. And in that moment, a vacuum of power was left behind, one that Sauron was eager to fill. Morgoth versus Sauron, the key differences, despite both being Dark Lords. Morgoth and Sauron were fundamentally different in their nature, goals, and methods. 1. Power and presence. Morgoth was a god of destruction. His strength was immeasurable. He could corrupt the very fabric of reality itself, twisting the land, poisoning the seas, and bending spirits to his will. His presence alone was enough to taint all that surrounded him. His malice seeped into the world like a sickness. But this power came at a cost. The more he invested himself into the world, the more he diminished. By the time of the First Age, he had spent so much of his essence corrupting and defiling Arda that he was weakened, no longer an all-powerful being, but bound to his physical form, vulnerable to defeat. Sauron, on the other hand, was more strategic. He never wasted his strength. Instead, he relied on deception, sorcery, and cunning. While Morgoth wielded brute force, Sauron wielded fear. 2. Rule and strategy. Morgoth wanted to destroy. Sauron wanted to rule. Morgoth's rebellion against the Valar was one of defiance. He sought to unmake the world, to tear down what had been built. He cared little for governance. He was a tyrant, not a ruler. His kingdom, Angband, was a place of nightmares, a fortress of terror, but never a civilization. Sauron, however, was a master manipulator. He did not seek chaos, he sought order. He wished to forge an empire, to bring the world under his rule, not merely to ruin it. Where Morgoth corrupted through force, Sauron corrupted through promises, through whispers, through gifts of power. The greatest example of this was the forging of the Rings of Power. Unlike Morgoth, who waged open war, Sauron deceived the elves into crafting these rings, binding them to his influence through the One Ring. His war was fought not just with armies, but with control. 3. Their final fates. Morgoth, for all his power, lost. The Valar cast him into the void, beyond time and space, where he remains to this day. But his shadow lingers, his corruption is eternal. Sauron, after millennia of struggle, was ultimately undone by his own arrogance. Unlike Morgoth, he was not cast into the void, he was annihilated. When the One Ring was destroyed, his spirit was broken beyond repair. He became a powerless shadow, incapable of ever rising again. The legacy of the Dark Lords, even though both Morgoth and Sauron were defeated, their influence never truly vanished. Morgoth's hatred poisoned Middle-earth forever, his malice embedded in the land itself. The very evil that Sauron wielded was born from Morgoth's corruption. Sauron, in turn, left a scar upon history. His rule reshaped the world, his wars changed the course of entire civilizations, and his legacy endured even after his fall. Yet, for all his cunning, for all his mastery over manipulation and control, he was, in the end, but a shadow of his former master. Morgoth was the first and greatest Dark Lord, true source of evil in Middle-earth, and Sauron was merely his most devoted disciple. The final shadow, the legacy of Morgoth and Sauron as we reach the end of this journey through darkness. one truth becomes undeniable: Morgoth and Sauron were not merely conquerors or tyrants. They were not simple villains in a tale of good versus evil. They were the embodiment of corruption itself, the creeping rot that spread through Middle-earth, changing it forever. Yet, despite their similarities, despite both holding the title of Dark Lord, Morgoth and Sauron were not the same. Morgoth was a god brought low by his own arrogance, the first and mightiest of evildoers. His power was vast, but his downfall was inevitable. He poured so much of himself into corrupting the world that, by the end, he was diminished, trapped within a physical body, fearful of battle, hiding behind fortresses, rather than standing as the godlike force he once was. In the end, his enemies cast him into the void, locked away beyond time and space, his voice no longer heard, but his malice never truly gone. Sauron, in contrast, was never a god. He was a disciple of evil, a master of strategy, manipulation, and fear. He did not seek to unmake the world, he sought to own it, to bend it under his perfect rule. But his strength was always tied to deception. He was never as strong as Morgoth in raw power, never as terrifying in sheer might. Instead, he was patient, weaving webs of control that ensnared even the wisest of beings. But patience has its limits. Sauron, for all his cunning, was undone by his own hubris. Unlike Morgoth, who was overthrown by the combined forces of gods and mighty warriors, Sauron was brought low by the most unexpected of hands, the hands of mortals, of a small and forgotten people who should never have been able to defy him. In his arrogance, he poured his essence into the One Ring, believing himself untouchable. And so, when the ring was destroyed, so too was he. Unlike Morgoth, he was not merely banished. He was obliterated, his spirit reduced to a powerless shadow, never to rise again. The eternal echoes of darkness, yet even in their defeat, neither Morgoth nor Sauron truly left Middle-earth. Their influence lingers, woven into the very fabric of the world. Morgoth's evil was so profound that it became part of existence itself. The lands he touched never healed completely. The shadow he cast upon the hearts of men, the thirst for power and dominion, the fear of death, all of it stemmed from his original corruption. Even after his banishment, his hatred lived on. And Sauron, though he was destroyed, his echoes remained. The scars of his war reshaped kingdoms. His influence lasted in the whispers of fear, and his methods of manipulation left a mark upon the world's history. He proved that evil does not always arrive as a force of destruction, but sometimes as a whisper, a promise of power, a slow and deliberate descent into control. This is why their legacies endure. Morgoth's raw hatred, Sauron's calculated rule-both, became symbols of what evil truly is. Not just destruction, not just war, but corruption, the slow poisoning of the soul, the hunger for dominance that never fades. And this is why, even in the peaceful years that followed their fall, there was always a lingering fear, a fear that somewhere, in the deepest shadows of the world, the spirit of Morgoth still waits that one day the first Dark Lord may return. For evil never truly dies. It only waits.